Hello, everyone. I'm PD. I'm very happy to once again be invited by the officials to share some of my experience from the past few years in player scouting and talent selection. Here are some of the more well-known players I have coached during their rookie years while they were on my teams. Players like Jiang Cheng and Xiao Oxi were outstanding young talents from the early LGD roster. Xiao Luo, Zhao Dian, Jue Yi, and Xiao Zai were part of the group known as the Youth Storm in 2023, and today they have become key players across various teams. Zhu Hao was a rookie I signed to KSG last year. He recently won the KPL Spring Finals and has established himself as a top jungler among the league's new generation of players. So today, I won't simply talk about how to find strong players. Instead, I want to share how to identify high potential talent from a much larger player pool, how to determine whether a ranked ladder star has the potential to become a professional player, how to develop them through training and review sessions into true professionals, and how overseas regions should balance short-term results with long-term development. Part 1. Player recruitment in academy team. Player recruitment in China's academy team system begins with having a sufficiently large talent pool. Common scouting channels include high-ranked peak tournament players, hero rankings and role rankings, streamer tournaments and platform tournaments, academy boot camps, city tournaments, and recommendations within high-level player circles. Each of these channels provides unique value. High-ranked peak tournament players help us identify individuals who can consistently compete at a high level over a long period of time. Hero rankings and role rankings allow us to observe a player's exceptional ability on specific heroes or roles. Streamer tournaments and platform tournaments often showcase stronger individual mechanics and competitive drive. At the same time, they give us direct access to team communications. A large percentage of teammates around major streamers and smaller streamers are also willing to explore a professional career path. Boot camps make it easier to evaluate a player's communication skills, discipline, mentality, and potential for growth. An experienced coach can quickly determine both the ceiling and floor of a player's limit through concentrated training and observation. Reputation-based recommendations are also extremely important during the early stages of a region's development. The high-level player community is relatively small, and genuinely talented prospects are usually noticed very quickly by others within the same circle. However, there is one point that must be emphasized. Recommendations are only an entry point, and rankings are only an entry point. Every player must ultimately be validated through tryouts. A player with a high rating is not necessarily suited for professional competition. A mechanically gifted player is not necessarily capable of performing consistently within a team system. The first step of scouting is to place potential candidates into the talent pool. The second step is to evaluate them using more professional standards through cross-verification. After establishing the candidate pool, we typically evaluate whether a player deserves deeper assessment from 3 different perspectives. The first is hard criteria. Does the player's age align with a professional development cycle? For example, our age expectations are relatively strict for Clash Lane and Farm Lane players. Ideally, a player should be capable of becoming a starting player and carrying major responsibilities by the age of 18. The requirements are slightly less strict for junglers. Mid lane and roamer players generally have more flexibility because those roles rely more heavily on accumulated experience. Other factors include whether the player's peak tournament or ranking meets the club's standards, whether their hero pool has sufficient depth, and whether they have any history of serious violations, intentional losing, or toxic in-game behavior. These standards determine whether a player has the basic qualifications to enter the professional system. The second is competitive criteria. We evaluate whether the player possesses clear strengths within their role. This may include laning ability, tempo control, teamfight decision-making, map awareness, resource management, and whether they can consistently carry games or consistently execute team strategies. Not every professional player needs to become a superstar core. However, every player must provide clear value within the team's structure. The third is professional criteria. This includes whether the player can handle high-intensity training, whether they can understand and accept coaching feedback during review sessions, whether they are willing to change their existing playstyle habits, and whether they possess basic communication skills. In the KPL, many top HOK players tend to be quite introverted. We often joke that they are socially shut off. If such players do not make an effort to improve themselves, the number of roles they can effectively play becomes very limited, and their professional achievements will also be capped. From my experience, one of the few highly successful professional players who remained relatively quiet was Nuoyan from E-Star. Even then, that success was built upon having Kat and Hua Hai as highly active shot callers within the team. Professionalism is especially important for overseas regions because many high-ranked players in emerging regions may be accustomed to relying on individual skill to solve problems. Professional competition, however, demands discipline, information sharing, strategy, and execution. Player evaluation should not focus solely on overall skill level, it must also account for role-specific attributes. Different roles influence the game in different ways, and therefore require different evaluation criteria. Players need to find a balance between mastering the details of their own lane and understanding the fundamentals of other roles. For Clash lane players, we focus on laning details, side lane management, engage and flank awareness, and whether they possess a relatively independent hero pool. A strong Clash lane player must not only withstand pressure, but also create opportunities to enter fights during the mid and late game. The jungler is the engine of many teams' tempo. Key areas of evaluation include jungle pathing, early game tempo planning, objective control, the ability to enable teammates, and the ability to close out games. For overseas regions seeking short-term competitive success, the jungler is often one of the highest priority positions to strengthen. For mid lane players, we evaluate wave clear efficiency, roaming timing, skill accuracy, teamfight positioning, and synergy with the jungler and roamer. The mid lane is not simply a damage dealer, it serves as the bridge between early game tempo and mid-game teamfights. For marksman players, we focus on laning consistency, ability to play under pressure, farming efficiency, gold conversion rate, and teamfight positioning. A marksman's decision-making in late-game teamfights often directly determines the outcome of an engagement. For support players, we pay close attention to vision awareness, tempo transitions, engage timing, mechanics, overall game understanding, and leadership ability. A mature roamer can turn scattered pieces of information into unified team action. Among all evaluation dimensions, I recommend focusing on 4 key qualities: talent, stability, adaptability, and professional attitude. Professional attitude is the most fundamental requirement. Can the player be punctual? Can they accept criticism? Can they maintain training discipline? Can they stay self-motivated through the repetitive cycle of review sessions and practice? These qualities may seem less visible than mechanics, but they often determine whether a player can truly become a professional. Without a strong professional attitude, it is like a pyramid without a foundation. Any future professional career becomes impossible to build. Adaptability determines the floor. Many high-ranked ladder players develop strong personal habits. If they are unwilling to change their playstyle or accept team responsibilities, they may perform well in youth training environments in the short term, but struggle to integrate into the intense demands of professional competition over the long run. Stability determines development value. Professional competition is not about a single highlight performance. It is about delivering results throughout an entire season. Anyone can perform when ahead. What matters more is whether a player can remain composed when behind, recover after consecutive mistakes, and continue performing under pressure. This is especially important because HOK has a very dense competitive schedule. Players who can maintain a high level of performance over a long period are particularly valuable. Talent determines the ceiling. It is reflected through reaction speed, mechanical precision, spatial awareness, teamfight instincts, and the speed at which a player understands game changes. Truly talented players often make decisions under pressure that others would never consider, yet afterward, those decisions seem completely logical. Next, we are going to talk about what training looks like in academy development. The core objective of academy development training is to transform a high-ranked player into a professional player. Ranked games emphasize individual performance, while professional competition emphasizes teamwork. Ranked players can often solve problems through mechanics alone. Professional competition requires discipline, information sharing, strategy, and execution. As a result, training must accomplish at least 4 things: establish professional match understanding, standardize hero pools, develop communication habits, and improve team coordination. From the perspective of player scouting and development, we frequently encounter several common issues. The first is a lack of team awareness. Some players possess excellent individual skill, but rely too heavily on solo play. They are unwilling to sacrifice resources for the team and struggle to consistently follow tactical requirements. This often causes them to become disconnected from the team during critical moments and may even lead to reckless decision-making. The second is an unbalanced hero pool. Some players are only proficient on a small number of signature heroes. Once the meta changes, their competitiveness drops significantly. Their value during BP also becomes limited, making them easier for opponents to target. The third is insufficient communication ability. Professional competition tests not only mechanics but also information coordination. If a player fails to provide timely information, focuses only on their own role, or communicates poorly during team fights, it will directly impact team decision-making and overall tempo. The fourth is unstable mentality. Some players perform very well when ahead, but become impatient when behind. Mistakes then affect their subsequent performance. They may also be overly sensitive to criticism and lack resilience under pressure. These issues are not simply individual weaknesses. They directly affect whether a player can adapt to the professional system, integrate into team-oriented play styles, and consistently perform under the pressure of high-level competition. Fortunately, these problems are not alarming during the academy development stage. That is why targeted instruction should be introduced as early as possible. The earlier a player is in their professional journey, the easier it is to correct bad habits. Fundamental training should focus on laning, skill execution, hero proficiency, and efficient goal generation. Teamwork training should focus on mid-jungle roamer synergy, coordination between side lane pressure and frontline tempo, vision control, engages, and counter-engages. In terms of game understanding, players should be encouraged to participate in BP discussions from the development stage onward in order to deepen their understanding of compositions. During matches, they should avoid limiting their perspective to their own lane and instead learn to think about resource trades, wave management, and overall map strategy from a broader team perspective. Communication training should emphasize concise and accurate information sharing, such as key skill cooldowns, enemy positions, and teamfight decisions. For mentality and discipline, coaches should observe how players respond to criticism, whether they remain self-motivated during long training periods, and whether they genuinely embrace the identity and responsibilities of being a professional player. Next, let me introduce what a KPL rookie draft looks like. Hope it will give you some insights on this subject. The KPL draft is essentially a key bridge between the academy development system and professional clubs. For the league, its purpose is to improve talent mobility, provide opportunities for new players to enter the professional system, and increase transparency in player recruitment. For clubs, it serves as a way to add young talent, reduce the cost of developing players independently, and make targeted selections based on roster weaknesses. For players, it offers an opportunity to gain the attention of professional clubs and move from academy development programs or secondary competitions into a higher-level competitive environment. Before the draft process begins, clubs must first clearly define their own roster needs. In other words, we need to determine which role requires reinforcement. Are we looking for a player who can immediately enter the rotation or even compete for a starting spot? Or are we looking for a long-term prospect with developmental potential? We must also determine whether the player is intended to strengthen the main team or serve as a reserve for the substitute team, while evaluating whether the budget and development timeline are aligned. Once these needs are clearly defined, the second step is to build a candidate list. Clubs need to systematically evaluate player profiles within the draft pool, collect footage from previous matches, review tryout data, and cross-reference performances from academy development programs, secondary leagues, and ranked games. This helps avoid making decisions based solely on a single match or a single data point. The final step is reaching a unified decision through internal evaluation meetings. The head coach focuses on the player's competitive fit within the existing tactical system, team style, and positional requirements. Data analysts provide objective performance metrics and comparative evaluations. Management considers roster planning, budget, and development direction before determining draft priorities. Through these three steps, clubs can move from selecting players based on intuition toward a more systematic and rational decision-making process. When selecting new players, evaluation should focus on 4 key areas. The first is competitive ability. This includes whether the player possesses solid fundamentals in their role, whether their hero pool is sufficient for professional competition and BP requirements, whether they have meaningful competitive experience, and whether their performance is consistently reliable. The second is compatibility. A rookie does not exist in isolation. They are joining a specific team environment. Therefore, it is important to determine whether they fit the team's existing style, whether they can address weaknesses in the current roster, whether their position or resource requirements conflict with core players, and whether they fit the current meta. The third is growth potential. Clubs do not evaluate rookies solely based on whether they can compete immediately. They also evaluate whether the player is worth investing in for the future. Factors such as age, career timeline, learning ability, mentality, and long-term potential must all be considered. The fourth is risk assessment. This includes discipline, injury history, performance volatility, communication skills, and the player's ability to adapt to club management and professional standards. Overall, draft selection is not simply about choosing the player with the strongest individual ability. It requires balancing competitive strength, team fit, long-term potential, and potential risks. The decision-making logic on draft day generally follows several priorities. The highest priority is the superstar prospect. Even if such a player requires time to adapt to professional competition, they are worth developing. A good example from basketball would be Victor Wembanyama, a player capable of reshaping an entire organization's strategy around him. In KPL, another example was JDG spending $6.5 million to acquire Ju Hao, who was widely considered the strongest prospect of his draft class. The second category is roles with urgent needs, particularly roles such as jungler and roamer that have a major impact on overall team tempo. For example, after AG won the 2023 KIC, Cat was no longer able to maintain the same workload and competitive intensity. AG decisively traded for an earlier draft position in order to secure Dashwai ahead of other teams. The third category is immediate contributors. These players already have competitive experience and can quickly integrate into the team's training system. For example, during the summer season of 2020, Jinyu was already considered an older rookie at 18 years old. He joined eStar during a transitional period and filled the marksman role after Huahai moved to the jungle position. The fourth category is strategic depth. These players are selected because they fit specific heroes, specific metas, or specific tactical systems. The benefit of this approach is that player selection becomes purpose-driven rather than emotional. Every draft choice serves both the team's immediate objectives and its long-term development plan. For example, when Qing first joined JC, the predecessor of DYG, he was primarily known for his strong split-pushing heroes. Coach Lin later built an entire 3-lane pressure system around the team, maximizing lane dominance and eventually leading DYG to its only championship. The development of rookie players can generally be divided into 3 stages. The first stage is adapting to the club system. After joining the club, rookies must become familiar with the training schedule of a professional team, learn the team's internal tactical language, and gradually establish consistent communication habits. At the same time, the coaching staff evaluates their professional attitude, discipline, and adaptability. The second stage is entering internal competition. Rookies cannot remain in the observation and development phase indefinitely. They must prove themselves through competition against academy teams, substitute team players, and main team players. They are evaluated through scrims and internal matches, while receiving specialized training based on their role. This stage helps determine their true ability and rate of improvement. The third stage is determining their development path. After a period of training and evaluation, the club must decide whether the player is ready for main team rotation, should continue developing on the substitute team, or would benefit more from opportunities through loans or transfers to another organization. For overseas regions, it may not be necessary to immediately replicate a complete draft system. However, the underlying principles are worth adopting: build candidate lists, collect match footage and try out data, cross-validate performance through youth development programs, secondary competitions, and ranked games, then allow coaches, analysts, and management to evaluate candidates together and establish clear recruitment priorities. When it comes to player selection, managers and coaches naturally approach the process from different perspectives. Managers are generally more focused on overall team operations and risk management, with the goal of creating long-term value for the club. The first area they evaluate is player stability. This includes whether the player can maintain a strong training attitude over time and whether they are prone to emotional fluctuations, disciplinary issues, or inconsistent performance. The second area is team dynamics. Managers need to determine whether the player will positively contribute to the team environment, whether they can accept rotation decisions, whether they respect the coaching staff's authority, and whether they are willing to integrate into the existing team culture. The third consideration is contracts and resource investment. Managers evaluate whether the contract cost is reasonable, whether the player has developmental value and future transfer value, and whether they possess commercial potential. The fourth consideration is public image and brand impact. Managers need to assess the player's reputation, fan base, and suitability as a public face of the organization. At the same time, they must evaluate any potential public relations risks. Finally, managers consider roster sustainability. Based on current season objectives, future roster plans, and the balance between veterans and rookies, they must determine whether it is necessary to begin developing future successors in advance. Coaches, by comparison, focus more directly on competitive performance and tactical execution. The first factor is meta-adaptability. Coaches evaluate whether a player is proficient on the strongest heroes in the current meta, whether they can quickly learn new heroes, and whether they truly understand the pace and priorities of the current version of the game. The second factor is hero pool and BP value. This includes whether the player's hero pool is deep enough, whether they can take responsibility for first pick heroes, whether they are vulnerable to bans, and whether they can provide tactical flexibility through flex picks or unique hero selections. Under global ban pick rules, the ability to play first pick heroes and the ability to flex heroes are two extremely important strategic advantages. For example, some teams are not comfortable selecting Lubin Master as a first pick. As for flex picks, one of the most obvious examples from this spring season was Ma Chao. In many cases, he would be selected within the first 3 picks as a clash lane hero, only to be moved into the jungle role during the final 2 picks. The third factor is scrim performance. Coaches pay close attention to laning quality, teamfight decision-making, execution of instructions, and overall error rates. The fourth factor is match execution. This refers to whether the player can successfully carry out pre-match plans, maintain clear decision-making under pressure, and sustain consistent communication quality in both scrims and official matches. The final factor is performance under pressure. This includes performances in crucial matches, the ability to adjust after being targeted by opponents, performance under public scrutiny, and the ability to recover during losing streaks. Neither perspective is inherently right or wrong. A truly mature player selection system incorporates both perspectives into the decision-making process. Players are not recruited solely for the next match, nor solely for the next 3 years. Teams must find balance between short-term results and long-term development, between veteran experience and rookie potential, between individual mechanics and team execution, and between star power and roster stability. Therefore, I recommend that overseas clubs establish a small review committee when making important recruitment decisions. Coaches provide competitive evaluations, managers provide risk and development assessments, and whenever necessary, data analysis and tryout performance should be included as objective references. Ultimately, the goal is not to select the most famous player, nor necessarily the player with the highest rating. The goal is to select the player who best fits the team's current stage of development and objectives. For overseas teams, I would like to offer recommendations on 2 different levels. If the short-term objective is rapid competitive improvement, teams can prioritize building around key positions. For example, an imported Chinese jungler or marksman can serve as the team's core. The jungler can take responsibility for early and mid-game tempo as well as shot calling, while the marksman provides late-game teamfight decision-making and consistent damage output. This approach can help a team establish a functional competitive structure quickly, while also allowing local players to learn professional match tempo from higher-level teammates. However, if the goal is long-term competitiveness, especially in non-Chinese speaking regions, teams must eventually transition toward local rosters and locally developed BP systems. The true sign of a mature region is not the ability to temporarily import strong players. It is the ability of local players to understand the meta, local coaches to develop systems, and local clubs to continuously cultivate new talent. 5 local players also possess significant communication advantages. Teams can consider developing straightforward compositions that emphasize strong team fighting and reliable crowd control chains. When building an academy development system, overseas regions do not need to pursue highly complex structures immediately. However, 3 elements are absolutely essential: training, review sessions, and player movement. Without training, players cannot develop systematically. Without review sessions, mistakes cannot be transformed into experience. Without player rotation, teams lack internal competition and promotion. For regions with sufficient resources, another option is to send high-potential players to China for closed training programs. Exposure to a more demanding training environment can accelerate their understanding of professional competition and help them achieve a significant leap in game knowledge and professional awareness. In any top-tier esports region, the real advantage does not come from a single superstar player. It comes from a stable and well-functioning talent system. The KPL region can continuously produce professional players not because high-ranked ladder players naturally become professionals, but because over time, a relatively complete mechanism has been formed across recruitment, training, competition, management, and decision-making that filters and transforms talent. On the recruitment side, high-potential talent must be identified from a large sample pool. On the training side, high-level ranked players must be transformed into professional competitors. On the competition side, scrims, drafts, and league play continuously validate player quality. On the management side, players must be able to consistently perform under high-pressure environments. On the decision-making side, managers and coaches must jointly balance performance, risk, and future development. For HOK overseas regions, the goal today is not only to find the next star player, it is to build a pathway where more young players can see a clear route into the professional system, can actually progress through it, and can remain within it. When this pathway becomes clear, the talent supply within the region becomes more stable. When talent supply becomes stable, club competition becomes healthier. When club competition becomes healthier, a truly international competitive ecosystem can emerge. This concludes today's sharing on player selection. Thank you everyone. If you have questions, feel free to ask.